Alright, hello. My name is Shed, and this is Gato Roboto. I'm going to be recording a submission video here for it for various marathons, specifically the any percent category of this game. The game is a Metroidvania platformer, a love letter to the original Metroids and such, things like that. Featuring a unique art style, this pixelated monochromatic theme that you can already see going on a little bit. So yeah, I'm just going to be watching back my PB here and providing some commentary. This is my PB, so it is a slightly higher than average play for me typically, but I will be pointing out where there are options for safer strats, where things might be risky and such as we go along. In the meantime, though, I do want to just preface by saying that this game is a particularly fun speedrun, and I have been told it is pretty neat to watch, so let's go ahead and get started. So right at the start here, we do your typical fare of skipping cutscenes and such. This game also has a fast dialogue option, so we can skip through all of the text boxes as fast as possible without actually mashing, which is super nice. At the start here, you can see we're running around as a cat. All we have is the ability to move left, right, and jump. Jumping is slightly faster, so we're going to be doing that as much as possible. And here we've encountered our first save point, which is going to allow us to acquire the mech suit. And that is the primary mechanic of this game, is that we can run around in the mech suit and shoot stuff, and eventually we'll get abilities that the mech suit has and such, but we could also leave the mech and run around as a cat anytime we want. But for now, we're just going to progress through the start of the game. We've acquired our mech suit and we're off to get our next ability, but we have to actually get there. So we're going to go ahead and take some damage boosts. That's going to be a common theme for this beginning area, and actually it's going to happen quite a bit throughout the game as we go. But typical fare for speedruns and platformers and such. Just kind of going through these areas as fast as possible, not taking saves. Doing some neat jumps, some more damage boosts and such. We've got a combat room, have to kill all the enemies. There's an interesting strategy here where you space out your shots because the enemies are invulnerable for a small period of time after you shoot them. So it's not just mashing as fast as you can, that would actually be slower. We've left the mech to do some swimming because the mech can't swim, but the cat can. And just go through these small corridors and such to collect our first ability, which is going to be rockets. And this is going to allow our mech to fire rockets that we have a regenerating ammo pool of. We actually head back through this area as a cat. You're supposed to head to the right from the rockets and pick up your mech again and take an alternate route back, but it is the same speed or slightly faster and significantly easier to just come back through this area as the cat again and pick up our mech where we left it. Alright, so here we go. This is the most major glitch of this game, and that might have looked a little weird, so I'm going to pause momentarily and explain what just happened. Basically, we used the save point, and to explain the glitch itself a little bit, we left the mech, jumped back into the mech while it was on a save point, and then left the mech at a specific time during the save animation. And what this has happened, what happened there then is, for some reason, this gives us our mech back, but with a smaller hitbox. So we still have the mech and all of its abilities and such, but we have the cat's smaller hitbox. And this is going to be important in many ways. Notably, this lets us get through some areas that the mech normally can't. But also, that room that we just went through here, we'll watch the save glitch again, and then the room immediately after it. So here's that save glitch. We left the mech, entered, saved, and left the mech at a specific time. And this room right here is actually the first boss of the game. But for some reason, when you're a small mech, it doesn't trigger. The boss fight does not actually trigger. So we were able to just head through that room without fighting the boss. And this is a common theme throughout throughout the game. So small mech is both used for movement, getting through areas that we normally couldn't, and also skipping boss fights and other fight rooms and such. So now we're going to head through to the next areas of the game as our small mech here. You might notice as well that we are using the explosions of the missiles to launch ourselves higher than we normally could jump. The explosions give us recoil. This can be used just there to head downwards as well, which is pretty neat. And there it is again. And this momentum that we can get from the rockets can be used just basically as more optimal movement, slightly higher jumps and such. Now we've taken an elevator, we're head down to the next area of the game. This area that we're in right now is a hub of sorts, a nexus, where the actual areas of the game all branch off of from here. So we're going to head to the next one, the aqueducts. And we're going to encounter the next major glitch of this run coming up. So I'm going to explain it ahead of time, which is called water mech. And typically the mech can't swim, but if you shoot a missile and eject just at the right time, you're actually able to drop the mech into the water, then go swimming and pick it back up again. So we're underwater right now with the mech, which we're not supposed to be. We're using some missile recoil to get up those platforms here. And what this allowed us to do, actually, is to head to the very end of this area. There's this area's gimmick is that there's 3 switches, basically, effectively, that you need to hit. And we're just going to head to the last one immediately. Oh, couple of mistakes here. This section right here can be pretty risky. You can see we're at 1 health, and actually, when you're a cat, you also have 1 health. So, any damage here would kill us and send us back to the start of this area, which can be a major time loss, but with a bunch of practice, it can be quite consistent. So here's that switch I was talking about. It's more of a treadmill, to be honest. So there's 3 of them in this area, and this is the last. Unfortunately, hitting the last one doesn't actually finish the area. We do need to hit all 3. But the reason we come down here to the last one first will become apparent after we do water mech again, so you can more clearly see we drop the mech into the water and then go pick it back up again. But we're actually going to come down here to the right, past this combat, because at the end of this area is our next skill, which is spin jump. It's effectively a double jump. It damages enemies when you contacted it while in your form, but also, as you'll be able to see, it has some strange momentum rules, particularly when interacting with rockets, and we can use that to our advantage to jump higher than normal, pick up some nice sideways momentum, and keep it for longer than we normally could. There's a great example of a double rocket boost. So this is going to be our main movement mechanic for a little bit here, is these rocket boosts with the spin jump. And so we used water mech right at the start of this area and dropped all the way to the bottom here to get this spin jump as fast as we can and have it for the rest of this area. So now that we have spin jump, we're going to progress through the rest and go get those other 2 switches like I mentioned. There's 3. We already got the last one, so now I need to go get the first 2. And we have our fancy spin jump rocket boost movement to get us there. There's an example of hitting an enemy with a spin jump. That also actually refreshes your spin jump, so if you hit an enemy with a spin jump, you can spin jump again, which is what happened there. And now that we've gotten that button, we can just head back the way we came. You might notice we are skipping a lot of the areas in this game. Water mech notably, that initial water mech we did to get the last switch and the spin jump skipped the final boss of this area, so we won't ever have to see him, and there's a bunch of side areas that we don't need to do that we're just not going to. This is probably my personal favorite area of the game to run, just because the spin jump rocket boost movement and the precise angles you can get with it is fun to execute, in my opinion at least. Here we're going to do a little bit of a tricky jump to skip a section where we normally wouldn't be able to use the mech, but we got through it nice and clean. That jump can take a couple tries, but it's not usually a major time loss. this is the save glitch to get small mech again, which means that this fight room here against this turret doesn't start. The fight is still here, this turret is still here, and we're able to damage it, but it's not actually fighting back like it normally would. And we're actually going to go ahead and kill it all the way, and then trigger the fight, and it's already dead. And that's because we would have to leave the mech here and remove small mech anyway. And then go back through that room. So by getting small mech and doing that fight quickly like that, as we did, that saves a little bit of time here. And then we're actually going to get small mech again. And this small mech that we're getting right here, we're going to carry through the next several areas of the game. This is perhaps the biggest risk of this run, is if you lose this small mech, which you lose it by dying, reloading, or accidentally leaving the mech and re-entering it, which is a single button, by the way, it can lose a lot of time, because this small mech here is very necessary for the next couple of areas, and losing it can range from major time loss to straight up soft lock. So this is perhaps the riskiest part of this run. If we lose the small mech, it costs a lot of time, several minutes in fact. But we can play it safe, and there are consistent strats we can do to ensure that we don't drop the small mech or die or anything like that. So here we're heading off to the next area of the game. That first area was the aqueducts with all the water. This area is the heat core, and it's very hot and has a lot of lava. The intended mechanic of this area is that you can't leave your mech, so you can't be the cat at any point in this area. And we can't leave our mech right now anyway, but because we have small mech, there's several gaps that we can get into right now that we normally wouldn't be able to, because normally we'd be stuck in our mech, which is too big. But we're small mech. So coming up real quick as we do some more fun rocket boost movement. This right here, this gap, being able to head through that gap right now skips more than half of this area. So there's a significant portion of this area that we will just never see now because of small mech and its power. So what this is going to let us do is we skipped, as I mentioned, we skipped a lot of this area, including 2 very long and RNG heavy boss fights. Skipped a cycle there, which was pretty neat. This room, for some reason, is a fight room that doesn't get skipped by having small mech, so we actually have to do the fight here, taking a bunch of extra damage unnecessarily. But now we are actually at the end of the area, using small mech again to get through these small gaps, and then pick up our next power-up, which is coolant. And coolant basically just gives us more missiles. The missiles work on a recharging system. If they overheat, you can't use them for a little bit, and the coolant gives us more of that bar, which is off to the left, as if you might be able to see it. So now we've collected coolant and completed the primary objective of this area, which is just to blow up some tanks. I don't exactly remember why. We're gonna head back exactly the way we came, pretty much. Except we're going to make a slight detour, which is coming up right here. We're going to drop down through this area and skip through a couple rooms with some nice rocket boosts, or some failed ones. And we're going to collect another skill. This one's called Phase Rush, and Phase Rush is a dash, and you can see we are moving very fast now. Rocket boosts are still going to be somewhat useful in some places, but now our primary movement has changed to the dashes, as you can see. Because it is a very, very quick form of horizontal movement, the fastest in the game, and that's why we made the detour to pick it up. And we're done with Heat Core, by the way. That is significantly shorter than this area would be without small mech, because there's several bosses, as I said, that have a lot of RNG that we don't need to fight at all. And now we're going to head to the next area, the third area, or perhaps the fourth. And anyway, in any case, this is the ventilation shafts, and the gimmick of this area is that typically you're not supposed to have the mech at all in this area, at least not initially. This area is supposed to be done mostly in cat form, but small mech lets us get here while still having the mech, and that actually lets us, that room we just went through is supposed to be like the exit, like you went and did the whole area and came up back through this area, that part, to leave. But we just went through it as small mech, and this is the final boss of this area. We skipped straight to the end of it, And there it is. That was the final boss. You are not supposed to have the mech and missiles for this. It is a much longer and drawn-out fight in a casual playthrough. But we just finished it. We hit the last button of this area, which is the entire reason we came here, was to hit that button. So we did, and now we're done. And now we just have to head back using the air mechanics of this area and our rocket boosts and recoils and such to get up as fast as we can. And that's it. That was ventilation. That was less than, like, I want to say even 10% of this area, but small mech has allowed us to skip the entire thing. So now that we're done with that area, it's time to head to the next one. Actually, first, I'm forgetting, we have to, for a story point that we're not getting any of because we're skipping all the dialogue, we have to go collect an item called the decoder, which is basically just going to, it's a key that lets us in the next area, basically. And the decoder is back in our ship that we started in at the very beginning of the game. But because of some of the dialogue we skipped, that little boost there that you saw me do that might have looked a little strange, we just do that because it's slightly faster than wading through even the fast dialogue that would normally be the way you get through there and break open the ship that you... It's a little complicated. Basically, we did a cool little trick there to skip some dialogue and collect the decoder faster than we normally would. It's not much faster, like maybe a second, but it's still faster, so we do it. And I think it's kind of fun besides. But yeah, so we just used the decoder, and now we are on our way to the next area, the incubator. The incubator, in my opinion, is the hardest section of the game. We want to keep small mech through it as well, although it is not as terrible. It doesn't cause soft locks if we lose small mech in this area, so it's basically just kind of a convenience. We can use it to do some strats we normally couldn't, like in this room, and skip some fights like that room that we normally would have to do. But there are several save points scattered throughout this area that we can use to reacquire small mech, or if we're low on health, we can save and refill our health to for safety and such like that. This is a fight room. We've seen a couple of them already that, like, the enemies are here, but and we can't just skip it with small mech, but small mech makes them not move, so we're going to take advantage of that fact. In fact, here's some invisible enemies that we can kill before they spawn in. And then we're going to lose our small mech intentionally and kill some enemies that we couldn't have done to finish the room and end the fight and progress. Here's the save point that I usually take. Optimally, you wouldn't, but I take it for safety to fill my health and such, because this section, as I mentioned, is perhaps the hardest in the game. Here we're going to do water mech again. This is the last time we're going to do it. And this skips a couple rooms. That one that we did the water mech in, it skips, and it skips this room partially as well. Or it's not really a skip, but it does save a significant amount of time. Here we're actually doing this puzzle as intended. Leaving our mech and running around in the cat for a bit, using a turret that we're supposed to have learned about in ventilation, but we skipped most of that area, so we never learned about it. And here is the elevator. This is the largest piece of RNG in the run. There is a save point that I can take for safety just before this as well, but this is an elevator fight. It's a common trope in video games. You've seen them before. The first portion of this is fixed. It's generally the same. Where the gaps are is RNG, but like which wave is frogs and which is bullets is always the same. These enemies always spawn in the same spot and at a fixed time, so I know all of that and how it works. Here we're gonna get single enemies spawning with waves of bullets that we need to dodge. But now, right now, at this point, the rest of the elevator fight, it continues, but it is completely random. I have no idea at this point what is coming, and have to deal with it on the fly. And this can be a decent amount of time loss. I've had this lose me upwards of 30 seconds before, but it's not the worst. That was a rare occurrence, and I can generally deal with it as it comes, especially with practice. Dying can lose a bunch of time, but it is uncommon, especially if you take a save beforehand. Here we're going to grab Small Mech Glitch again. This is just going to skip a couple of fights. There's an example of failing Small Mech. That's actually one of the few times that I do it in this run. Small Mech is a frame-perfect trick, but failures are fast. You lose only a few seconds by failing it, and you can just retry over and over again until you actually get it. But yeah, you're seeing some fight rooms that get skipped, some that don't, like this one. We're not exactly sure why some get skipped and some don't. But we're just going to keep our Small Mech because of the ones that it does, in fact, skip. Here's a save point. We can refill our health and such. And if we die, we can... or lose Small Mech in some way, we can get it back there. Basic and kind of slow combat against these enemies who have some very long invulnerability windows, which is unfortunate for the speedrun, but we've learned the best way to deal with them. Some cycle skips in this room, using the dash. This is perhaps the least fun fight room, because it can be so slow. But there's a fun little quirk about this game where this Smasher, you can actually just shoot straight through if you're Small Mech. I'm not sure why. It's something about how the missile hitboxes are lower than they normally would be, I guess. But it's kind of funny, in my opinion. It's one of my favorite quirks about this game, which is saying something, because I love a lot about this speedrun. And this is actually the last fight room of the game, and of this area. And we're just going to slowly kill this enemy, and then we'll actually be on to the final boss. Final boss can be a little bit challenging. This is a save point we can take for safety if we die or need to reload back to it, because this is the first phase of the final boss. And we have kind of a unique strategy here where we're using Small Mech to kill it before it aggroes on us, just like we've seen before a couple times in this game. But because of the way this works, if you kill it entirely, the game will crash, hard crash. So that's what grabbing that save point is useful for, is if I don't do that sequence of attacks that I did right there correctly, I can crash the game. So having that save is useful, and that way we don't lose very much time if it happens. But we basically damage as much as we can without crashing the game, and then deal the last couple points of damage needed right here to finish phase 1. Then phase 2, we fight completely as intended. It's a difficult fight. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of skill, but typically don't lose too much time. And if you do die in this section, you don't have to do phase 1 again, so it's not a huge time loss if you do. The primary challenge with this fight is that all of the boss's attacks will destroy your missiles before they hit him. So you need to time when you're actually shooting your missiles at him. But there you go. He is done. We're into the final stretches of this game. I don't think I get it. Yeah, I didn't get it here, but there's a glitch you can do where if you leave the mech before your last missile hits the boss, there'll actually be 2 mechs on screen here. And in a second, after this cutscene plays itself, instead of running through this next bit as the cat, you could actually pick up one of the mechs and dash your way through this area, which saves about 8 seconds. I didn't get it here, but that's something kind of neat to go for, if a little bit risky, because that does make the final boss fight there harder. But yeah, there is the time, and that was Gato Roboto any percent. Say a couple more things. As you probably saw, it's kind of a neat run. It's a cool game. It's a really fun run. I've been told people like watching it as well. So hopefully you choose it for the marathon. It can be a little bit risky. I mentioned a couple points where there's risks of soft locks and such. It can be difficult. You have a limited amount of health. We only had 6 hits throughout the entirety of the game, and there's a lot of strats which require damage boosts and such. So it can be a little bit risky. There's some points where soft locks are very possible, but with practice and skill, it can be used to them, be consistent at them, and such. And there are several safety saves and such that I don't take in this run that I could in a marathon setting, perhaps. Things like that have backup saves and all of that. So I'm not worried about consistency or going over estimate or something like that. But yeah,